Her daughter scoffed, "Why don't you just go where the quiet people are?" Marlene Miller, retired nurse and widow, didn't argue. She just listened. Sierra had already picked paint colors for the cabin she never owned. By spring, it was sold to strangers, with no warning, no forwarding address, and no keys. She'd spent a lifetime being careful not to offend. Now the locks spoke for her, and they didn't recognize Sierra's name. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Marlene stood on the front step, clutching a small glass baking dish wrapped in a faded tea towel. The door to Sierra's townhome flung open before she could knock. "Mom, finally," Sierra called, stepping aside without a hug. "We're already plating." Inside, the house buzzed. Music thumped low from hidden speakers, some playlist with songs that felt like they had too many buttons pressed. Grant was yelling toward the kitchen from the dining area about overcooked bacon. Her two grandkids raced across the hardwood in socks, nearly toppling a side table. A golden retriever barked from behind a baby gate. Marlene stepped in slowly, carefully removing her boots, unsure where to put them. Sierra's foyer had a shoe rack now, industrial, matte black, and entirely full. "I'll just leave these here," she murmured to no one in particular. She carried her casserole into the dining room and set it on the edge of the table. No one noticed. "Did you bring something?" Grant called over the noise. "Hash brown bake," Marlene answered. "Oh," Sierra said, wrinkling her nose. "We already have one. It's from Whole Foods." A pause, just long enough to register. Marlene smiled gently and folded the tea towel, placing it on her lap as she sat. The only open chair was at the far end, half tucked beneath a high countertop, away from the rest of the chatter. She took it quietly. Conversation bounced around her like hail on a tin roof. Grant's work trip, the dog's grooming appointment, the boys' soccer tryouts, someone's podcast deal. Marlene sipped from her coffee, lukewarm, served in a mug that said, "Grind now, wine later." She waited for a lull, then offered, "I stopped by the cabin last week. Snow's starting to bow the porch rail again. Might need reinforcing before the thaw." Sierra barely looked up. "We'll get to it this spring. Grant's planning a full deck revamp anyway." "Oh?" Marlene blinked. "Just be mindful of the drainage slope near the fire pit. Your father had to—" Sierra cut in, checking her phone. "We're thinking of putting in a hot tub instead." Marlene opened her mouth, then closed it. Someone changed the subject to spring break flights. Marlene sat back, letting the conversation pass her like traffic. Later, as the table was being cleared and dessert plates clinked onto the marble countertop, Marlene tried again. "I brought the new cabin insurance forms," she said, voice low but steady. "They list me as sole policyholder, but I thought if you were still planning on using it—" Sierra laughed, a light, sharp laugh that silenced the room just enough. "Oh, Mom," she said, shaking her head, "why don't you just go where the quiet people are?" A beat of silence. Grant smirked. One of the boys chuckled. The other didn't look up from his tablet. Marlene smiled politely, then stood, folding the tea towel with care. "No worries," she said softly. "I should head back early anyway. I've got things to sort." Sierra barely glanced up. "Well, drive safe. Say hi to the quiet people for us." Marlene walked to the door without another word. She retrieved her boots, slipping them on without sitting. Outside, the air was brisk, cold enough to bite, clear enough to sting. She stepped off the stoop and looked down the block, rows of tidy homes with tidy porches, all painted in the same neutral optimism. She took a deep breath, held it, and exhaled slowly. There was no storm on her face, just silence. But something had shifted. Inside her, something had stood up from the folding chair. The next morning, Marlene sat at her old oak desk beneath the front window, the one that still bore faint, sun-bleached outlines from long-gone photo frames. A manila envelope rested at her elbow, Harold's last will, along with the deed to the cabin. She'd pulled it from the fire-safe box tucked in the coat closet, where important papers had gone to sleep undisturbed for years. She sipped lukewarm tea as her eyes scanned the document. There it was. Grantor, Harold H. Miller. Grantee, Marlene R. Miller. Sole proprietor. Transferred January 3, 1998. Nothing else, no mention of Sierra, no co-ownership, no trust transfer, no quitclaim deed, just her name. Marlene leaned back, exhaling long through her nose. She reached for the reading glasses she still refused to wear around company and slid them on. Then she read it again. She thought of the last time Sierra had mentioned the cabin outright, some brunch last fall. Between bites of eggs Benedict and a rant about HOA dues. "We'll probably renovate the whole top floor before we retire, make it into our forever place." Sierra had said it so breezily, so convincingly, that even Grant had nodded along as if the ink had long dried. But the truth lived here, on her desk, on record, in black and white ink that didn't care about assumptions. She turned to the small black accordion file beside her and flipped through the labeled tabs. Utilities, taxes, repairs. Each invoice bore her name, her payments, every furnace fix, every plumbing upgrade, even the new roof in 2017. A memory surfaced, Grant hauling in granite samples like a contractor. Sierra trailing behind, saying, "It's just a refresh. We want it to feel like us." Marlene had stood in the doorway that day, coat still on, watching a stranger install a smart thermostat. No one had asked. Not before, not during, not after. Another memory, the locks. Changed without warning. Grant had texted her a photo of the new keypad with a casual, "All upgraded, just trying to be safe out there." She'd driven all the way to the cabin the next weekend and found herself locked out. He'd laughed when she called. "Oops, forgot to give you the code." She remembered pressing her hand flat against the cedar siding then, as if it might still know who she was. She had thought forgiveness was just quiet understanding, letting things slide for the sake of peace. But peace hadn't been what she got. It had been erasure. She folded the deed carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Her hand didn't tremble as she sealed it. Then from a nearby drawer she retrieved a notebook. Not digital, not searchable. A paper ledger with a soft maroon cover. She flipped to a blank page and wrote, with deliberate care, "Property status. 2024 deed in Marlene's name only. No transfer to Sierra ever filed. Sole financial contributor equals Marlene. Locks changed without consent. Remodels made without notification. Presumed ownership equals unfounded." At the bottom she drew a line and added one final sentence. "Legal right to sell, rent, or renovate equals fully mine." She capped the pen. Then sat in stillness. The silence wasn't sad, not today. It was sharpened now, refined. A quiet, unmistakable clarity had replaced the static. She reached for her phone, opened her contacts, scrolled past Sierra and Grant, then tapped a few names down. Hank Middleton, real estate. She didn't call. Not yet. She just stared at the name and whispered to herself, "They built a future on something I never gave away." The gravel popped under her tires as Marlene pulled into the drive. The cabin looked unchanged from the outside. Same weathered cedar siding, same sloped roofline, same stacked woodpile Harold had insisted they keep stocked even in July. But something in its posture felt different, occupied in a way it hadn't been. She parked beside a silver SUV that wasn't hers. The license plate frame read, "Number Mom Life." She didn't bother checking whose it was. Inside, the air was warm but stale, like someone had tried to air it out but forgot to stay long enough. Marlene slipped off her gloves and took a slow lap through the house. The front room was unrecognizable. Her old floral love seat was gone, replaced with a low Scandinavian couch that looked designed for Instagram, not comfort. A bright yellow rug clashed with the pine floors. Pillows embroidered with phrases like, "Lake hair don't care," were stacked in pairs like props. In the corner stood a reclaimed wood wine rack, half-stocked with rosé and Pinot Noir. She paused. It wasn't the rack itself. It was the way it was placed, like a flag in conquered territory. She moved down the hall, peeking into the guest bedroom. Gone were the twin beds she and Harold had set up for friends' kids. Now, a queen platform bed sat diagonally across the room, wrapped in navy linen, the tags still on the throw blanket. The bathroom smelled like new tile sealant. In the back room, formerly Harold's reading nook, she found Sierra's unframed art leaning against the wall. A canvas with soft beige brushstrokes sat next to another piece that looked like a storm had been frozen mid-tantrum. Marlene opened the linen closet. Her old hand towels were gone. In their place, 6 plush white ones, monogrammed with a large looping S&G. She walked into the kitchen. The counter was cluttered with branded spice jars, a marble cutting board, and an electric frother she'd never seen before. Then her eye caught it on the side of the fridge, a wall calendar pinned with a gold clip, each month handwritten in Sierra's swirling cursive. June, Grant starts deck build. July, 3 weeks off, lake season begins. August, paint upstairs, retire 2026. Marlene stared at the page. Each line felt like a line drawn through her. She didn't cry. She opened her purse, pulled out her phone, and began taking photos, room by room. Not just the calendar. Everything. Furniture, pantry, contents, new art, the lake life welcome mat on the porch, the keypad lock on the front door. She documented it all. Evidence, not of a crime, but of an entitlement that had gone unquestioned for too long. By the time she stepped back out onto the porch, the sun had dipped low. Frost edged the gravel, crisp and glittering. A dark green pickup rumbled up the drive. Hank Middleton climbed out, clipboard in hand. "Evening," he said, eyes scanning the cabin. "Still a beauty, huh?" Marlene nodded, just barely. He walked up beside her and whistled low. "You didn't tell me it was this updated. You'll get full price and then some." She looked at him, arms folded tight across her chest. "It wasn't updated for me." "No," Hank said carefully. "But now it can work for you." They stood in silence for a moment. A bird flitted across the tree line. Somewhere down the hill, ice cracked on the lake. Hank tapped his clipboard. "If you're serious, we should list before the spring thaw. Cabin sells better with snow still on the ground. People romanticize it." Marlene didn't answer right away. She looked back at the house, her house, then down at the photos now saved to her phone. Her voice was even. "Start the paperwork. I'll bring the deed tomorrow." Hank gave her a long look. "You sure?" Marlene turned to the front door, her fingers brushing the keypad Sierra had installed. She didn't answer. She just pressed the reset button. The lock beeped softly, then flashed red. Marlene smiled. The listing went live without a sign in the yard. No balloons, no Zillow carousel, no charming fixer-upper language blaring in boldface, just a carefully worded digital posting on Hank's private network of cash buyers and investment whisperers. One photo. The lake at golden hour. No mention of previous owners. Marlene didn't want noise. She wanted traction. "This way," Hank had explained over the phone. "We keep the curious out and draw in the decisive. People who don't need to fall in love, just to be first." Marlene simply replied, "Make it clean." He had. By Wednesday, they had 6 private inquiries and 2 serious bites. By Friday morning, one of them came with a number, full price, no contingencies, local couple, ready to wire funds immediately. Hank's subject line was short and square. "Offer in, let's talk." Marlene didn't respond right away. She needed the rhythm of a normal day. She needed the contrast. At 11:03 a.m., her iPad dinged. FaceTime. Sierra. Marlene tapped accept and smiled as the video feed loaded. "Hi, sweetheart." Sierra's camera was angled low, showing more kitchen backsplash than forehead. "Hey, Grant's installing the new towel warmer upstairs, so I figured I'd call before the dust gets worse." Marlene nodded. "That's thoughtful." Sierra set the phone upright and walked across the kitchen. "Anyway, we've been talking about redoing the bunk room. You know, the one with those dated twin frames? We're thinking modular beds, Murphy style, so we can use it as a yoga room when the kids aren't there." Marlene blinked. "You don't do yoga?" Sierra grinned. "Not yet." On screen, Marlene caught a glimpse of a mood board taped to the fridge. Brass sconces, reclaimed barnwood, a bottle of Napa Valley Chardonnay in the corner. "Oh," Sierra added, turning back to the screen, And we're thinking of adding a proper wine fridge by May, like a dual-temp, climate-controlled one. Grant's obsessed. Marlene smiled gently. Sounds ambitious. Nothing crazy, just things that make it feel like ours, you know? Marlene nodded, her expression neutral. She watched, she listened, she said very little. When the call ended, she tapped the red button slowly, then opened the Photos app on her phone and typed a note under a folder labeled Cabin, Timeline. 3/8, Sierra planning guest room overhaul. 3/8, May installation of wine fridge. 3/8, spoke as if ownership was hers. Then she deleted the call history and turned her ringer off. Back at her desk, she opened Hank's email again and stared at the buyer details. Emily and Marjorie Delaney. Married, early retirement, cash in hand, local, respectful, no contingencies. Marlene leaned back in her chair. She remembered Grant making a joke once, at Thanksgiving probably, about how they were just holding it for the next generation, how he called the cabin inherited real estate before it had ever passed hands. And Sierra didn't correct him, neither had she, but the correction was coming, not in words, in ink, in escrow. Her phone buzzed again, a second email from Hank. Need confirmation by Monday, they're ready to wire same day. Marlene clicked reply. Her fingers hovered for a moment, then typed, confirm acceptance. Proceed. Closing before spring break is essential. She pressed send. A slow, steady exhale followed, like air she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Outside, a cardinal landed on the dogwood branch just beyond the window. It stayed there longer than most birds did, just watching. That evening, Sierra texted casually, "Hey, Mom, do we still have those ugly old paddles at the cabin? Kids want to paint them over spring break." Marlene didn't respond. Instead, she turned off her phone, lit a candle, and opened the folder where the original deed now sat, tucked behind a fresh manila envelope marked, Transfer Docs, 2024 Buyers. She looked at it for a moment, then closed the drawer softly. The office of Nguyen and Keller was tucked above a bakery that smelled like burnt sugar and cinnamon. Marlene climbed the narrow stairs slowly, envelope in hand. The deed papers inside were sealed, but she knew every word by heart now. She had read them so many times they felt memorized. Not out of fear, out of clarity. Pauline Nguyen greeted her with a handshake and a smile that didn't try too hard. She was in her mid-40s, sharp blazer, silver nails, and eyes that had seen every kind of family feud and stayed dry through all of them. Hank sent over the offer, Pauline said, sliding into her seat behind a desk so clean it looked rented. It's solid, clean, fast. You're lucky. Marlene set the envelope down with quiet finality. I'm ready. Pauline flipped open the file. March 3rd is closing. We'll file the wire instructions early that morning. By noon, it'll be final. Marlene nodded. And Sierra? She's scheduled to open the cabin for spring on March 12th. Pauline raised an eyebrow. Cutting it close. Not really, Marlene said. I'm early. She's just uninformed. Pauline tilted her head. And you're sure she has no legal stake? She has assumptions, Marlene said. No paperwork. Good, Pauline said, signing her initials with a flick. Then it's yours to end. Cleanly. But I'll say this, pack carefully. Photograph everything. People rewrite history when they lose access to it. Marlene met her eyes. Already started. By that afternoon, she was back at the cabin, her sleeves rolled, phone camera ready. She worked alone. The wine rack went first. She emptied the bottles into a cardboard carrier and labeled it Cellar Items, Sierra. Next, the twin linen sets, still crisp in their packaging. She folded them precisely and laid them into a plastic bin. Guest bedding, not used. Then the art, unframed, unmounted, and as impersonal as hotel decor. She wrapped each piece in brown paper and bubble wrap. Wall decor, returned to owner. In the kitchen, she boxed the labeled spices, the electric frother, the half-used bottle of pomegranate balsamic Sierra had insisted on bringing for ambiance. Each bin was neatly stacked in the sunroom, rowed like a soft invasion being reversed. She documented everything, photos from each angle, timestamps, labels. In Harold's old study, she found a mason jar filled with Sierra's childhood rock collection. She left that on the shelf. Some things even now weren't hers to touch. By dusk, the cabin felt suspended in time. Bare, but not abandoned. Quiet, but purposeful. The kind of quiet that came after a verdict. Marlene stood in the center of the living room looking around. The room still had Sierra's fingerprints, but now it had her handwriting too, in careful block letters on every bin. There was no yelling, no announcement, no catharsis. Just process. That evening, she sat at her dining room table back home, sorting receipts into a manila folder marked Cabin Closeout. She placed it next to another folder, Legal Cabin Unshared. Her phone lit up with a new message from Hank. Buyer walkthrough confirmed. They'd love to meet you when you drop the final docs. They're bringing flowers. Marlene smiled slightly, then opened her planner. She flipped to March 3rd and wrote in pen, Closing, 11:30 a.m., cabin keys, witness your own signature. And under it, in pencil, March 4th, call power company. End account in my name. She capped the pen. Outside, the wind stirred the bare branches against the windows like someone knocking gently or warning. Inside, she was already packed. The first time Marlene saw the buyers in person, the lake was still frozen over. Not smooth or idyllic, just rigid and half-glazed, like something caught between seasons. Emily and Marjorie Delaney pulled up in a quiet electric SUV, no dealership plates, no fuss. They stepped out with thermoses in hand, wearing wool coats and boots that looked like they'd actually been used. There was nothing flashy about them, no performance. Marlene appreciated that. You must be Marlene, Emily said with a kind smile, adjusting her scarf. She had silvering curls and warm brown eyes. We feel lucky just to see it before the thaw. Marjorie extended a gloved hand. We brought muffins. From the co-op downtown. Figured it might soften the intrusion. Marlene shook her hand and gestured to the porch. Come on in. I already turned the heat up. Inside, she walked them through the cabin like a docent guiding a private tour. No frills, no anecdotes, just facts. This is the original fireplace. Harold insisted on leaving it unpainted. They nodded. These windows were replaced in 2019, Marvin double panes. They keep the heat in better. Again they nodded, listening closely. No interjections, no questions about updates or open concept. In the kitchen, Marlene stood aside as they moved quietly through the space. Marjorie opened a drawer, saw the neatly stacked labels. You've kept it immaculate. I've kept it clear, Marlene said simply. In the sunroom, Emily glanced out at the lake, then turned. We want to do right by it. We know we're stepping into something that mattered. It still does, Marlene said, but it's time. There was a pause, light, respectful. Marjorie finally spoke. We can wait until April 1st to move anything in. Give you room. Marlene nodded. I appreciate that. They didn't ask what they were giving her room for. They didn't ask about Sierra or the reason the bins in the sunroom were all neatly stacked and tagged. They didn't need to know. They were here to live forward, not pry backward. After they left, Marlene lingered in the hallway, hand resting on the doorframe like someone testing the stability of old beams. Her phone buzzed. Sierra. Marlene let it ring once, then again, then answered. Hi, sweetheart. Sierra's voice crackled through with the unmistakable edge of someone spiraling. If one more idiot CCs me on a client call, I swear to God I'm going to break into the snack drawer and never come out. Marlene smiled faintly. Rough day? You have no idea. The Q1 projections are trash. The team's clueless. And Grant keeps sending me TikToks about off-grid solar like that's helpful. Well, Marlene said, walking into the kitchen, at least you've got spring break coming up. Exactly, Sierra snapped. I can't wait to get out of here. Just be at the lake, away from people. Marlene opened the fridge, took out a pear, set it gently on the counter. Sierra didn't notice the shift in tone. I mean, honestly, it's the only thing keeping me sane. That place is our peace, our future, you know? Marlene rolled the pear slowly under her palm. Sure. Anyway, Sierra continued, breathier now, let me know if you need anything before we head up. Grant wants to pressure wash the back stairs. Think we still have that old nozzle? Marlene smiled, thin, measured. I'll check. Great, love you. Love you too, honey. She ended the call. Let the silence settle. Then picked up her planner. She flipped to the end of March. Circled April 1st, wrote in ink, vacancy becomes presence. The wind outside howled gently along the siding, but inside the cabin, hers for just a little while longer, everything remained still. The morning she packed the final box, the lake outside was a sheet of white noise, ice crust breaking gently under the sun, the kind of thaw that didn't announce itself, only happened. Inside the cabin, Marlene wrapped the last of Sierra's wine glasses in recycled newsprint, careful not to clink them together. She labeled the bin in neat capital letters, kitchen, known essential, and added it to the stack already near the door. 8 labeled containers, all her daughter's assumptions, sorted and sealed. The moving team arrived at 10 sharp. 3 young men in blue hoodies, polite but brisk. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. Marlene pointed them toward the sunroom, then stood aside and watched as the boxes disappeared one by one. She had booked a small unit in Duluth under Sierra's name, paid 3 months in advance, just enough time for Sierra to figure out what to do with the past she thought was her future. By noon, the movers were gone. By 1, she was on the phone with the alarm company reprogramming the system. Yes, change the primary contact, she said evenly, to the new owners. And then, the utility companies, water, gas, electric, post office. Each call was its own boundary, another strand of thread being tied off, another voice saying, "Are you sure?" And every time Marlene simply said, "Yes, final date is March 31st, forward mail to P.O. Box 418. By mid-afternoon, the cabin felt almost weightless. She stood in the center of the living room, once again empty. No bins, no wine rack, no evidence, just the bones of the house. Pine, stone, silence. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was earned. Her phone rang. Hank. She answered on speaker, resting the phone on the windowsill where Harold's fishing hat used to hang. "It's done," Hank said. "Wire went through. You should see the deposit by 5. Full amount. No hiccups." Marlene didn't smile, but her voice was steady. "Good. They'd still like to meet you for coffee sometime. Said you left the place in better shape than most vacated homes." "I didn't vacate," Marlene said. "I concluded." Hank chuckled softly. "You're something, you know that?" She didn't answer. Outside, a pair of deer moved slowly across the clearing near the tree line. They stepped with instinctual caution, pausing with each crunch of thawed snow. Marlene watched them go. Later that evening, she emptied the fridge, poured out a half bottle of oat milk Sierra had brought up last trip, tossed the container into the trash, tied the bag neatly, and set it outside. She wiped down the counters with lemon oil, ran a final cycle on the dishwasher, stood in the hallway, her hand grazing the old photograph still hanging by the thermostat. Harold, holding a fish the size of a suitcase, laughing like he couldn't believe his luck. She didn't take it down. Let the new owners see it. Let them know laughter had happened here, once. Real, unforced. At dusk, she lit the last fire she would ever build in that fireplace. No ceremony, just flame, smoke, and orange light flickering across her expressionless face. When it burned down to embers, she placed the keys, 2 sets, in a small bowl on the kitchen counter. Next to them, she left a single folded note. "Welcome. May this place bring you only truth." She closed the door behind her without looking back. In the driveway, the Camry's engine turned over quietly. She checked her phone one last time. One unread message from Sierra. "We're coming up early. The kids are off school Friday. Hope that's okay." Marlene didn't open it. She turned off the screen and drove. The silence followed her, not haunting, just whole. The silver SUV curved up the gravel path just before sunset, headlights flickering against the thinning trees. Grant squinted through the windshield. That can't be right. The porch light's off. Sierra sat stiffly in the passenger seat, arms crossed. She probably forgot to leave it on. Whatever. The cabin came into view. Dark windows, no smoke from the chimney, no signs of life. Grant shifted the car into park. You grab the bags? Sierra stepped out before he'd finished the sentence. Her boots crunched down on the grit-covered ice patches as she made her way toward the front steps. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out the familiar brass key, and slid it into the lock. It didn't budge. She frowned. Tried again. Still nothing. Behind her, Grant opened the hatch, pulling out a duffel and the grocery cooler. You good? The lock stuck, Sierra muttered, jiggling it harder. And then it happened. A sharp electronic chirp, high-pitched and persistent, erupted from above the doorframe. Grant froze. What the hell is that? A second chirp. Then a voice. System armed. Please enter access code. What code? Sierra snapped, stepping back. There was never a code. They stared at the blinking red light embedded above the door, then at each other. Sierra's stomach sank. Then she saw it, taped neatly to the front door with painter's tape, a white piece of cardstock typed in black serif font. This property no longer belongs to you. No salutation, no signature, no explanation. Just the sentence. Clean, certain, final. Sierra tore it off the door. Is this a joke? Grant read it twice before the color drained from his face. You don't think... The alarm triggered. A shrill, pulsing siren that shattered the forest quiet. Lights began to flash inside. Automated. Cold. Sierra yanked her phone from her bag with shaking hands and dialed. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the screen. It rang twice before Marlene answered. Her voice was calm. Even. Oh, she said, you're there. There was a pause. Then Sierra's fury boiled over. What the hell is going on? Why won't my key work? Why is there a note on the door? Marlene didn't raise her voice. Because it's not your door. You changed the locks? You activated an alarm system? No, Marlene said. The new owners did. Silence. Then, what new owners? The ones who closed on the property. March 3rd. It's in their name now. You sold the cabin? Sierra's voice pitched up, sharp and trembling. You sold our cabin? Without even telling me? Our, Marlene repeated. You never asked. You only assumed. But we were going to retire there. Grant and I, we made plans. I saw the calendar, Marlene replied. It was very detailed. You can't do this. I already did. A beat. Then another. Grant, still on the porch, looked to Sierra. What is she saying? Sierra barely breathed. Marlene's voice softened, but not in the way Sierra hoped. Go home, sweetheart. The lake will thaw, with or without you. Click. The call ended. Sierra stood motionless, wind biting at the edges of her coat, the alarm still screaming behind her. The paper in her hand fluttered, then fell. For the first time, the silence between mother and daughter wasn't passive, it was strategic. By Monday morning, Sierra had gone from confused to litigious. Marlene was slicing pears for a tart when the first email landed in her inbox. Subject line, "This isn't over." No greeting, no punctuation, just a hastily attached screenshot of the cabin's front door, the alarm light glowing red behind the glass. 5 minutes later, Grant called. She didn't pick up. 10 minutes after that, a second email. Longer. This time. Sierra's tone had escalated from confused indignation to outright accusation. We have rights. You never informed us. This was a family decision. I'm consulting with a lawyer. Marlene forwarded the email chain to Pauline without commentary. Pauline replied within the hour. All filings are clean. Deed history is clear. Nothing was jointly held or promised in writing. 0 grounds. Let her shout. It won't echo in court. Marlene placed her phone face down and went back to baking. The sugar crusted quietly at the edge of the pears. That evening, Grant called again. This time, Marlene answered. "Hi," she said flatly. "Hey, Marlene," he said, voice measured. "Look, I just think maybe we've had a miscommunication. This whole thing's gotten out of hand." "No miscommunication," she said. "Just a correction." Grant cleared his throat. "It's just, family should be about unity, not paperwork. Sierra's devastated. The kids are confused." "And yet," Marlene said, "none of you were confused when the guest beds got replaced, or when the locks changed, or when the wine fridge showed up in my kitchen." There was a silence. "Marlene," he tried again, "this doesn't feel like you." She considered that, then replied, "That's because you never really paid attention." She ended the call before he could respond. By Tuesday, the Facebook posts began. Screenshots of the locked cabin. A photo of the old porch with the caption, "When your own mother sells your future without warning." A filtered selfie of Sierra in a parked car, looking exhausted, tagged, "Nothing like betrayal to kick off spring break." Friends chimed in with crying emojis and vague affirmations. "So wrong. Sending love. Family should do better." Marlene didn't reply. She didn't even read them. Instead, she ironed her blouse, put on a soft plum sweater, and drove to the church on Oak Street. The ladies' prayer circle met in the library now. Fewer stairs. They welcomed her like no time had passed. "Still knitting?" one asked. Marlene smiled. "Starting again." She left the church with a sign-up sheet tucked in her purse. Tuesday afternoons, grief and recovery class. Volunteers needed for tea duty. She put her name down twice. On Thursday, she had coffee with her neighbor Gwen, who'd just finished chemo and wanted to talk about absolutely nothing related to health. They laughed about old sitcoms. They debated pie crusts. Not once did Marlene mention the cabin, not because she was hiding anything, but because it was already done. By Friday, the noise had dulled. Pauline checked in one last time. "Radio silence on their end. They've got nothing to stand on. Let them rage." Marlene replied, "They're not raging. They're reckoning." That weekend, she sat on her back porch with a new skein of yarn and a pattern that had once belonged to her mother. Simple stitches, small rows, a thing made slowly, with care. Her phone lit up again. A new post from Sierra. A blurry photo of an untouched driveway, captioned, "Some homes just don't forgive." Marlene turned the screen off, then picked up her needlework and kept stitching. Without pause, without guilt, without reply. The message came in at 2:17 a.m. Marlene didn't hear it, not because she was asleep, but because her phone stayed powered off after dark now. She'd begun that ritual sometime mid-March, around the same time the wind stopped sounding like questions and started sounding like answers. She checked her email over breakfast. Half a grapefruit, dry toast, black coffee. The subject line was a repeat offender. "Please call me back." No body text, no punctuation, just one last flare in a fire that had already burned out. She tapped once to open it, once more to delete. Then she opened her phone's settings, block contacts, add new. She typed Sierra Miller. Next, Grant Thompson. Confirmation? Yes, 30 days, not forever, but long enough to hear herself think. By noon, she had made it halfway through reorganizing her sewing cabinet. She'd sorted needles by size, untangled 3 kinds of embroidery floss, and discovered 2 unopened spools of silk thread she didn't remember buying. She made a note to stitch a quilt label, her name, year, location, on the back of each finished project moving forward. History should be documented by the people who live it, not those who feel entitled to rewrite it. After lunch, she walked to the mailbox and back, 4 blocks each way. The wind was soft, sun just touching the top of the budding trees. A boy rode past her on a scooter, dragging one foot for control. She smiled and nodded as he passed. He didn't notice her. She liked that. That evening, she fed the cat, lit a sandalwood candle, and sat down at her writing desk. Not the computer, the real one. The oak desk Harold had insisted on refinishing with his own hands the summer after they married. A clunky drawer, a brass lamp, paper thick enough to carry memory. She opened her notebook, lined pages, navy blue cover, and uncapped a fountain. Pen, the good one, the one with Harold's initials still etched near the nib. She began, "Dear Harold, I never told you how much I hated that first winter in the cabin. The walls were drafty, the plumbing groaned, and the chimney smoked even when it wasn't supposed to. But you lit every fire with a sense of ceremony, like it meant something sacred. I didn't get it then. I do now." She paused, breathed, then continued. "You'd be proud of how I handled this. I didn't yell, I didn't beg, I didn't even explain. I just acted. I used the name on the deed, the one you left in my hands. I remembered the weight of keys, the feel of pine beneath bare feet, and the difference between being inherited and being assumed. I never wanted to make enemies of family. I still don't, but I won't be erased. Not quietly, not kindly. You wouldn't have let that happen to me, Harold, so I didn't let it happen to myself." She ended the letter there, didn't sign it, just folded the page in thirds and placed it in the drawer beneath the old birth certificates, between a property tax receipt and a birthday card from a neighbor who had since moved away. That night, she made herself a small dinner, sautéed spinach, garlic toast, 2 squares of dark chocolate. She didn't check her phone. She didn't refresh Facebook. She sat on the couch beneath a crocheted throw and watched the fire flicker in her small gas stove. Contained heat, chosen light. When she stood to turn in for the night, she paused in the hallway, eyeing the mirror near the coat rack. The reflection stared back at her, lined, composed, and entirely unbothered. She clicked off the hallway lamp, and in the soft dark whispered, "I kept the part of myself they never saw coming." Then went to bed, alone, but absolutely whole. It was a quiet Saturday when Sophie came by, unannounced but not unwelcome. She knocked once, then pushed the screen door open with that same easy familiarity she'd had since middle school, the kind that didn't need permission. Marlene was in the kitchen, wrapping banana bread in wax paper for the church bake sale. "You want coffee or iced tea?" Marlene asked, not looking up. "Tea's fine." Sophie sat at the small table, her jacket still on. Something about her posture, shoulders slightly lifted, hands folded too neatly in her lap, gave Marlene pause. This wasn't just a visit. She poured the tea slowly, placing the mug in front of Sophie. No words, not yet. Sophie stared at the steam a moment, then said, almost too softly, "I saw the Facebook posts. The ones from Mom." Marlene didn't flinch. "Ah, she's upset. I imagine she is. She said you blindsided her, that you cut her out of what she was supposed to inherit, that you humiliated her." Marlene sat down, uncrossed her legs, rested her hands on the table. "I didn't humiliate her," she said, calm as a still lake. "I corrected an assumption." Sophie looked down, twisting the mug slightly. "Why didn't you just tell her?" Marlene tilted her head. Would she have listened? Sophie opened her mouth, then shut it again. Marlene leaned back in the chair. "Do you remember when she and Grant replaced the bunk beds?" Sophie nodded. "Sort of. I remember the new ones, the Navy comforters. I wasn't asked. I just arrived one weekend and the old beds were gone. Same with the thermostat, same with the art, same with the locks." She paused. "Same with me." Sophie's eyes glistened. "But the cabin—" "It was mine," Marlene said gently. "Your grandfather left it to me. On paper and in trust. I never transferred it, never promised it, never relinquished it. But she thought, she decided. There's a difference." Silence bloomed in the space between them. It wasn't harsh, just real. Sophie wiped her eyes. "I think she honestly believed it would be hers one day. I know she did." Marlene's voice didn't rise. "And she acted like it already was. That's where the debt started." Sophie looked up. "What do you mean?" Marlene picked up the tea kettle, refilled both mugs slowly. "People think generational wealth is about money, about what's passed down. But there's another kind of inheritance, how we treat what we're given, how we carry the people who gave it." She paused, then added, "Sierra forgot that part. Sophie sat with that. Her face was younger than her mother's, but her eyes weren't naive. They understood weight. I didn't do it to punish her, Marlene said. I did it to finish something, to keep it from becoming a story that excluded the truth. Sophie reached across the table. Her fingers were cold. Thank you, she said, for telling me. I wasn't sure if you'd, defend it. I don't need to defend it, Marlene replied. I just need to be honest, and you're the only one who asked. Tears slid down Sophie's cheeks now, quiet, embarrassed ones. I think Mom is scared that if you cut her out like that, maybe someday I'll do the same to her. Marlene didn't answer right away. Then, tell her I didn't cut her out. I stepped back in. Sophie stood and hugged her, tighter than Marlene expected. She felt her granddaughter's breath hiccup against her shoulder. Do you hate her? Sophie whispered. Marlene pulled back, looked her in the eyes. No, she said, but I don't owe her what she imagined. Sophie nodded. As she opened the door to leave, she turned one last time. Will you ever tell her all this? Marlene looked out the window. The wind had picked up, bending the dogwood branches in slow arcs. I just did, she said, and Sophie understood. The Oregon coast had lived in Marlene's mind like a postcard she'd never mailed. Sharp cliffs, gray skies, the sound of water rolling over rocks instead of sand. She'd once read a travel article about a town called Yachats. Small, misty, no chain stores, the kind of place that didn't care if you came or left. On Monday morning, she bookmarked 3 rental listings, all under 800 square feet, each with a stove, a porch, and at least one view of the ocean. She liked the idea of salt in the air instead of grief in the walls. After lunch, she walked to the community center and signed in at the front desk under her usual name, M.R. Miller. Room 3, the receptionist said with a smile. You're up today. The chairs in the grief group circle were a little crooked. Marlene fixed them before anyone arrived. She preferred symmetry when sadness was involved. It gave people something to lean against. They trickled in slowly, widows, mostly. One man who had lost his brother, a woman who never explained who she had come to mourn, only that she did it with her whole spine. Marlene opened with a question. What did you wish someone had said to you in the first 2 weeks? It was quiet for a long time. Then one woman whispered that it wasn't a punishment. Heads nodded. Marlene waited. Let it settle. She didn't offer advice. She never did. But she told a story. Just a small one, about how she still folded Harold's fishing vest every spring and placed it in the same spot in the closet, even though he hadn't worn it in over a decade before he died. Memory doesn't owe us freshness, she said. It just asks for a little dusting now and then. Afterward, one of the newer attendees lingered. You ever think of doing this professionally? You have the voice for it? Marlene smiled. I'm retired. From what? Marlene paused. Other people's stories. When she got home, there was a voicemail from Pauline. Hey, call me when you have a second. You've got a nibble on another asset. Marlene dialed back while warming a bowl of lentil soup. It's the lot next to the cabin, Pauline said. The wooded one. A couple of years ago it was rezoned. You probably didn't notice. I didn't, Marlene admitted. Well, Pauline said, somebody did. A builder, local, wants to add a small eco-bungalow. Offered cash, preliminary interest only, but worth considering. Marlene stirred the soup gently. That land was Harold's, she said. He always said it was just trees and deer. And now it might be someone's future view. Marlene sat with that, the way things transformed under time, under eyes that saw use instead of just sentiment. Does it need my attention urgently? No, Pauline replied, but it's yours to decide. Entirely. After the call, Marlene pulled her Oregon rental listings back up. One of them had already been booked. Another had dropped in price. She saved the last one to a folder labeled, Maybe Next Chapter. Outside, the wind picked up just enough to move the wind chimes by the porch. Chimes Harold had bought at a roadside market somewhere in Wisconsin, thinking they sounded less shrill than most. They still did. She closed her laptop, poured a glass of wine, then opened her planner and wrote in soft pencil under June, "Oregon? If not forever, at least for a while." She capped the pen. And in the same neat cursive on the next line down, she added, "Let them build whatever they want on the lot next door." She didn't mean the builder. She meant Sierra. She meant Grant. She meant anyone who thought their future could be paved over hers. Let them build. She was done carrying it. The offer for the adjacent lot came through on a Wednesday morning. Clean cash, local builder, no delays, no noise. Marlene signed the acceptance paperwork in her kitchen, the same place she'd once stitched hems and packed lunches and opened report cards with a mix of pride and dread. Now she signed as the sole and final authority. She didn't even flinch. That land was never part of anyone's plan but Harold's, she told Pauline over the phone, and he never had a plan for it. Pauline chuckled softly. "Well, now someone does." "Yes," Marlene said, "and it's not mine to babysit anymore." That afternoon, she loaded the last 2 bins from her garage into the back seat of her Camry. Sierra's leftovers, throw pillows, outdated chargers, a novelty wine opener shaped like a flamingo still in its box. Most of it had been too minor to argue over, too impersonal to keep. She drove to the women's shelter on 6th and Maple, the one with the blue awning and flower pots by the door. A volunteer helped her unload the items without asking questions. "Are you moving?" the girl asked. "No," Marlene said with a small smile. "Just clearing space." Later that week, she stopped by Glenview Cemetery, where Harold's name was etched into a marble placeholder beneath a dogwood tree. The second space, hers, sat beside it, paid for long ago. It had always made sense, until it didn't. The groundskeeper, a gentleman named Lewis, met her by the office. "I'd like to cancel the reservation," Marlene said, sliding a folder across the desk. Lewis frowned. "Everything okay?" "Perfectly," she said. "I just don't need to lie beside someone forever to prove we belong to each other once." Lewis blinked, then nodded. "We can transfer the credit. Use it toward a new plot or a private urn garden if you're going that way." "I am," she said, "and I'll choose it when I'm ready." She drove home in no hurry, stopping once for a soft-serve cone from a roadside stand she hadn't noticed in years. The girl at the window was no older than 19, all glittery eyeliner and chipped acrylics. She didn't recognize Marlene, didn't know any history behind the order. Marlene liked that. The following Saturday, Marlene pulled a small cedar box from the closet, her keepsake chest. She added to it for the first time in nearly a decade, the deed transfer from the cabin, the receipt from the lot sale, the flyer from the women's shelter. She placed each paper in carefully, like stones in a garden path. At the bottom, she tucked in a new envelope, unsealed and empty. For whatever comes next, she thought. That night, she poured a glass of rosé and sat on the porch as the neighborhood dimmed into evening. Lights flicked on in windows. A couple walked by with a stroller. A dog barked once and was silenced with a laugh. Inside, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. One new voicemail. She didn't check it right away. She finished her wine first, then walked in and hit play. Sierra's voice. Tired. Not angry. Not performative. Just small. "Hi, Mom. I know you don't owe me anything, but Sophie said you talked. She said you were calm. I don't know if I understand everything yet, but I just wanted to say I'm still here, in case you ever want to talk. Or not. Okay. That's all." Silence. Then the message ended. Marlene stood still for a moment, hands folded. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she picked up the cedar box again and slid a blank note card inside. On it, she wrote 2 words, "Maybe later," then closed the lid and turned off the light. Word got back to Marlene in the most predictable of ways, through Gwen, her neighbor, while folding bulletins in the church foyer. "Saw Sierra's post last week?" Gwen said, carefully aligning corners. "Still telling folks you gave the place away in your old age. Said you weren't thinking clearly." Marlene didn't look up from the stack. Gwen paused. You want me to correct her? No need, Marlene said calmly. The truth doesn't need to argue with a microphone. It has ledgers. Gwen smiled a little. Still, I'd want to say something. I did, Marlene said. In escrow, in legal filing, in notarized print. She didn't flinch when she said it, not even a flicker. That kind of clarity came after Flame, the kind that wasn't about proving anything anymore, just living beyond the heat. That Friday, Marlene packed a thermos and a blanket and drove north. She didn't tell anyone, not even Sophie. She just set the GPS to a park overlook she remembered from years ago, on the other side of Lake Vermilion. Far enough not to trespass, close enough to see what used to be hers. The lake was thawed now, spring light scattered across its surface like spilled coins. A kayak cut across the distant shore. The cabin stood in its usual place, partially hidden behind the pines. Different windows, a new porch railing. The eco-bungalow next door had already gone up, small, sleek, probably full of bamboo shelves and minimalist silverware. Marlene didn't hate it. She sipped her coffee, leaned back in the driver's seat, watched without watching. A moment later, two figures stepped onto the cabin porch. Emily and Marjorie, most likely. One carried a basket of folded towels. The other knelt to sweep the steps clear of pine needles. No music, no shouting, no "Welcome to our lake life" banners. Just quiet utility. People using something with care. Marlene stayed until the shadows began to tilt. She didn't cry. She hadn't in months. When she left, she didn't take the long way. She didn't linger at the bakery they used to visit, didn't swing by the gas station where Harold used to insist on washing the windshield himself. She didn't even glance in the rearview mirror as the lake disappeared behind the ridge. She'd already grieved the cabin. What remained now was maintenance of peace. Back. Home, she washed the thermos, hung the blanket, and sat down to a dinner of roasted vegetables and brown rice. She answered 2 emails about grief group schedules. She returned a book to the library. She turned off her phone again before bed. Before slipping under the quilt, she opened her cedar box one more time. The note card was still there. Maybe later. She smiled faintly, then added a new note, this one clipped behind it. It read, "I left the cabin before it could erase me again. That's not cowardice. That's knowing the difference between legacy and weight." She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. That night she dreamed of cliffs, not cabins. And in the dream there were no doors to lock behind her. The trail curled along the bluff like a ribbon caught in sea wind. Gravel crunched under Marlene's boots, each step deliberate but light. Oregon's coast unfolded beside her, gray, jagged, restless, the kind of beauty that didn't try to be charming. It simply was. Below, a mother and daughter ran along the wet sand. The child darted ahead, shrieking in delight as waves chased her back. The mother followed, arms outstretched, laughter unfiltered. Marlene watched them from above, unseen but present. She didn't feel wistful. She felt right. The wind pulled at the sleeves of her fleece jacket, carried salt into her lungs, and tucked cool dampness under her collar. There was nothing performative here. No curated backdrops, no matching monogrammed towels, just sky, water, cliff, and space to be still. At a bend in the trail, she paused. Behind her, tire tracks half erased by wind. Ahead, a weathered wooden sign with a hand-painted arrow that read, "Java Tide, half mile." She kept walking. Her mind didn't turn toward what she'd left, not Sierra's Facebook posts, not Grant's earnest condescension, not even Sophie's tears. She thought instead about silence, not the kind people feared, but the kind people earned, the kind that tasted like clarity, like autonomy, like no longer carrying the version of yourself that others demanded. At the trail's end, a cluster of cedar buildings came into view. One of them had driftwood letters nailed above the door, Java Tide. The place smelled like roasted beans and ocean rot, sharp, honest. Inside, a chalkboard menu offered 6 things, max. She chose a black Americano and sat at a window table overlooking the rocks. The mother and daughter passed by again, this time holding hands. Marlene sipped slowly. Her phone was off. Not because she needed escape, but because no one needed answering. She took a notebook from her bag, not the heavy one. A smaller, travel-worn one with only a few blank pages left. She wrote one line across the top of the page. Peace doesn't need to explain itself. She didn't write more, didn't need to. Later, as she walked back along the trail toward her rented cottage, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and an ocean-facing porch, she saw a cluster of sea glass wedged between two rocks, green, frosted, glinting like something that had survived pressure and time. She pocketed one shard, not for memory, just for proof. That evening she made soup, turned on a jazz station, opened the window and let the coastal air in without fear it would carry old voices. She curled up beneath a quilt she hadn't made and didn't care who had, and as she turned off the light, she smiled at nothing in particular. Retirement isn't about where you end up, it's about who you no longer answer to.